We love having you as a supporter of the folk school. And there's more than one of you in this group today, but I think while there's some familiar faces to me, there's also some new faces. So thank you so much to your group for having me. I love talking about folk schooling and what I do here. But I actually wanted to start by asking if you have a second to think about what you know or don't know yet about folk schooling or folk schools. If you're comfortable using the chat, go ahead and just drop it in the chat. What is a folk school? How would you answer that question? What is a folk school? If you're not comfortable with chatting, feel free to just speak up for a second and tell us a couple words about what you think folk schooling is or what you know now about folk schooling. If the answer is nothing, that's fine too. Okay, Miriam says, I think it teaches folk arts.
I think I would add, besides arts, also culture.
Folk arts and culture as well. Thank you. And Jane says, I attended the folk school in Grand Marais to drive Norwegian carriage horses. Wow. That's something. Yes, the North House Folk School in Grand Marais is a big one. Any other ideas? What is a folk school? Or what has your experience of folk schooling been so far? No additional ideas? Well, what is a folk school is one of the things that I promised to address today, but spoiler alert, it depends on who you ask. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what folk schooling can be. But like I said, it really varies depending on who you're asking. And I'll give you really just a brief history of folk schooling as a movement or as a concept, as a philosophy, and introduce you to a little bit about what's going on with US folk schools today. And then I'll turn our attention to the Keweenaw, to the Finnish American Folk School here. I am the director of the Finnish American Folk School, and my colleague Phyllis Fredendahl is in here today as well. And she was the director until just 2 months ago. So Phyllis, feel free to chime in the chat if you have anything to add at any point. So I'll talk a little bit about what we do here in the Keweenaw and how you might be able to get involved if you're interested in either learning more or doing more with us. So as I think the summary of this talk suggested, the roots of folk schooling are Scandinavian. In fact, folk schooling or the concept of the folk school began in Denmark in the 19th century, the early part of the 1800s. And in my experience, no presentation or article about folk schooling is complete without a painting or photograph of this very stern-looking man pictured here. This is NFS Grundtvig, who was a Danish pastor, philosopher, living in, he passed away in the 1870s. So in the first part of the 19th century in Denmark. And he is often considered to be sort of the granddaddy of the concept of folk schooling. However, he never ran a folk school. He was really focused on the philosophy or philosophies of education and trying to reimagine what education could and should be like. And it was really a moment in Denmark when most educational institutions were focused on classical models of education. Teaching was happening in Greek and Latin rather than the language of the people, of the folk. And he was seeking to change that, or he believed that it should be changed, and saw these really direct connections between education and democracy, a young democracy, and saw education really connecting to democracy. Entire books have been written on this subject. And if you're super interested, you can always shoot me an email after this and I can recommend some resources about Grundtvig and his philosophies. But sort of to summarize where the beginning of folk school philosophy started and some of the core values of that movement, things like lifelong learning. So learning doesn't end when you become an adult. Non-competitive learning environments without formal assessment or credentialing. So folk schools, even when they were started, were intended to teach things, but not with the goal of a credential, not with the goal of a degree or a certificate necessarily. The process was as important, if not more important, than the product. And that's a theme that we'll see also in contemporary folk schooling examples. In the case of Denmark in the 19th century, for Grundtvig and his followers who were actually running the folk schools, it was seen as an alternative to nationalism or an alternative form of nationalism. They were seeing problematic forms of nationalism. That's, again, books have been written, but folk schooling and this model of education was seen as an alternative. And finally, there was this really keen focus on the local community. And so I've included here a quote that a colleague who runs the Folk School Association really loves to share, and I've come to really love to share it as well, because I think it really gets at a lot of what we do. And this is from the 1870s, from a folk school, from the folk school movement in Europe. Quote, "Stick your finger down into the ground and smell where you are. This is where the needs of the people are found, which can be different in different times and different places." And if there's one commonality between Danish folk schools and folk schooling in 1950s America, which I'm about to talk a little bit about, and our folk school here in the Finnish American folk school here in the Keweenaw, this is one of those themes. It's different. It changes over time, and it changes based on place, depending on what people are interested in, what people feel they need, what people are able to teach or need to teach and share with their communities. So with that, we turn our attention from Northern Europe to the United States. And how did we end up with folk schools here in the US? So in the early 20th century, political progressives were reading about Danish folk school models or Danish education models generally, and were really inspired by them and felt that it was pretty important to bring them to the United States and set them up in the United States. Some of those early folk schools were set up in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Some of the really famous folk schools, or what became really famous folk schools, if anybody's heard of folk schools in the US, actually happened in the South. So sometimes when I talk to people about folk schooling, they think it's a Southern thing, and that is because of these two folk schools I've named here on this slide. One is the John C. Campbell Folk School, which is in North Carolina. They were founded in 1925, and they're still primarily based in Brasstown, North Carolina, but they have since set up a satellite campus, and they are even still today the biggest folk school in the United States. And their mission, they are kind of like our folk school, focused on craft, or if you're familiar with, I think Jane said she's been to Grand Marais, to the North House Folk School. They are teaching arts and crafts and music and dance and song, and they have some really great advertisements where their little taglines are things like, "We still make things," or "I made this," or things like that. So a focus on making and the value of making is a big part of what they do. You may also have heard of the Highlander Folk School, which was another early folk school in the United States, which was founded in 1932 in Tennessee. And it still exists today, but with a different name. It is now known as the Highlander Research and Education Center. And this picture here, I've always really loved this picture. I have seen sources saying that this picture was actually taken by an FBI agent. And this image is of Martin Luther King Jr., Pete Seeger, Rosa Parks, and Ralph Abernathy, and an unidentified young person at Highlander in 1957. You can see the Highlander Library sign in the background there. So Highlander was founded by two gentlemen in the 30s who were really interested in labor movements, social justice, ending racial segregation. And by the 1950s, it was really a hotspot for a lot of civil rights organizing, as you can kind of imagine based on this picture. One person who's not in this picture who was really important to that movement was a woman named Septima Clark, who, if you're familiar with civil rights history, was originally from South Carolina, quite involved in the NAACP. And she was teaching literacy and many other things actually at the Highlander Folk School. And I mention this because this is actually how I got into folk schooling. I did my graduate work at the University of Rochester, and I was studying citizenship testing for immigrants and refugees. As a education student, I was focused on English as a second language ed, and in seeking models for adult education that connected to social justice, literacy testing, citizenship education, I discovered Septima Clark's work at Highlander, and that was the first time that I started learning about folk schooling, and here we are. So those are just two examples, John C. Campbell and Highlander, that are quite well known among some people in the US, but they're not the only ones. And the folk schooling movement in the United States has really grown to be a pretty diverse contemporary movement. Again, the focus being on local place-conscious education. So the focus at Highlander at the time and the place in the 50s, for example, was on social justice, ending racial segregation. That was the focus then, and it has evolved and changed even in that place over time, which is something that's true for all folk schools. So let's turn our attention to today and folk schooling today, contemporary folk schooling. So to go back to Northern Europe for just a moment, folk schooling is still happening there, but in kind of different forms. In Denmark, there are still folk high schools, or sometimes they're called folk colleges, and they are for generally for younger people who are often cohabitating. I think I mentioned that kind of earlier when we were joking about eating breakfast. They're really focused on living together, working together, spending a lot of time together, still without this formal credentialing, but definitely focused more on younger people. At the same time, there are schools in the Nordic countries and Scandinavia, also in other parts of Europe, that are more like what we might say or talk about as craft schools, which are adult community education. And I included this picture here on the left because this is an image from a folk school in Finland. Phyllis Fredendahl took this picture last fall when she was traveling to Finland on an American Scandinavian Foundation grant to study folk schools and weaving kind of all over Finland. You should have her do a presentation about that because it was pretty great. But this sign in the back, this is in the town of Rovaniemi, and this is their folk school in Rovaniemi, which, as the sign says, they've been teaching since 1921. And there's a woman here weaving on a floor loom, which I don't know, you probably can't see because I'm a little thumbnail against my PowerPoint, but I'm in a room filled with floor looms right now at the folk school. So that's a little bit of a connection between contemporary folk schooling happening in Europe right now, in Finland specifically, and what we're doing here in the Keweenaw. We're also members here in North America of the Folk Education Association of America, which is really a wonderful support. All of us doing folk schooling in, not all of us, but most of the folk schools in North America are members of this association. We meet monthly via Zoom. So like I meet with people from John C. Campbell, from North House, and from a lot of other schools that are really regional and locally known schools. And the leaders of this organization have tried to define or identify what makes a folk school, to try to define this. And I've spoken with Dawn Murphy, who's the leader of this organization, about it. And she says, it's really hard to pin down because it is so specific. It is so guided by what people in a specific place and time need, that we're all doing different things. There are folk schools that focus on web design. There are folk schools that focus on homeopathic medicine. There are folk schools that focus on house building. There's all kinds of, it's a diverse contemporary movement, but there are some things that really kind of draw us together, some similarities that we all have. And so this is from the Folk Alliance site and what they've come up with and what they publish in their literature. So first of all, they talk about folk schooling as education for life. And that goes way back to Denmark, talking about lifelong education. That is still really a big component. Folk means people. Of course, maybe many of you know that, but that is getting at the emphasis on education, focus on what people are interested in, what people need and want in their lives. And it's worth noting too that we have conversations in this group about sometimes reclaiming the word folk, or sort of different perceptions of the word folk. It's been used in both quite negative and positive ways by various groups through time and even currently. But for folk schools, the focus is really on people's needs, and that's why that is a component of what we do. Folk means people. Craft and connection to self. Many, I don't think it's fair to say all, but many folk schools in North America today have some emphasis on craft, and also a longstanding emphasis on the connection to self. Another way this is framed in some of the philosophical underpinnings from Denmark is talking about personal transformation or personal identity, and how learning skills, learning craft, making art, sharing song doesn't just make a thing, it also transforms a person individually, as well as transforms their connection to their community. Another theme that runs through a lot of folk schools: place, history, stories, nature, and different folk schools will emphasize different parts of this. There are schools that the nature part is the most important element of what they do. There are other folk schools that are really focused on dialogue and stories. Also music, dance, and song. Remember what we saw in that picture from Highlander, Pete Seeger, right? So if you think about the different ways in which music can be a part of an institution or a part of a community group, it can mean, like in the case of our folk school, music education. It can also mean, in the case of John C. Campbell Folk School, they live communally, and they start every day with morning song, where a musician or a staff member or someone will lead the group in song to begin the day. So what music, dance, and song looks like in each place could be different, but is a pretty common element found throughout a lot of different folk schools. So that is a very broad definition of folk schooling, talking a little bit about the roots. If I had to summarize sort of the three things that are core, not only to what we do, but what we share with other folk schools, would be that process over product, that it's about learning through doing. And if you're the final thing that you make isn't perfect. That's not really the point. This communal spirit or connection with community and community members, and also that idea of like craft and connection to self and personal transformation are all pretty important to contemporary folk schooling and what we do here. So let's talk about the Keweenaw, shall we? So if I had planned differently, I might have actually had you all take a little poll at the beginning to say how many people knew that we had a folk school here in the Keweenaw. I am finding that not everyone does know that, but here's a little bit about us and what we're doing and where we are and where we've come from. So we are the Finnish American Folk School, and the folk school was founded in 2017 as a project of the Finnish American Heritage Center at Finlandia University. I was not a staff member at the time of the folk school's founding, but I was a student of the folk school, also an instructor. I taught knitting and music in the early days, actually before it was called a folk school, and they were considered in the enrichment classes of the Heritage Center. Of course, as you know, almost exactly a year ago this week, Finlandia announced its closure. And initially, those of us working for the folk school, as well as the Heritage Center and the bookstore, were facing immediate layoff because of the closure. We were not involved in direct undergraduate services. But Finlandia Foundation National stepped in and saved our jobs and our work and the places where we work as well. So we are now still a program of the Heritage Center, but a program of Finlandia Foundation National. And Finlandia Foundation has no affiliation with the university. I always need to say that because the names are similar. They're a 501c3 that has been operating since the 1950s as a cultural nonprofit organization, and they are based in California. But 13 months ago, they had 2 part-time staff members. Then they hired an executive director, and then 2 weeks later, they got 6 new employees here in Hancock. So while they are still based in California, the majority of their staff are now actually here in Hancock, Michigan. And 2 of us are here at the folk school specifically. And now, what do I mean when I say here? So I am sitting in what is now the folk school fiber studio. I'm on the ground floor of the Juhtila Center. If you don't know it as the Juhtila Center or the Juhtila Center, you know it as the old hospital, perhaps, here in Hancock. And the foundation and the folk school now own all of the equipment from the three of the former studios of the art program at Finlandia University. So we have the equipment here in the fiber studio. I mentioned lots of looms and many other good things. Also the ceramics studio and the wood shop or model shop. And we also offer programs in other places. Some of our programs are happening at the Heritage Center or even offsite, depending on the situation. But we do have this really rich collection of equipment, really amazing collection of equipment here in Juhtila. So what we do is really rooted in Finnish American traditional skills and practices. For example, up there on the left in those pictures, that's me teaching a jouhikko class in January of 2020. That's the instrument that Miriam was talking about in the introduction that I've studied in Finland. So that's a very direct connection to Finland. But we do other things too. We are also really focused on our local community, sticking your finger into the dirt, smelling where you are. We also teach and learn things that are related to the Keweenaw more generally, or the Upper Peninsula more generally. And I always like to reiterate, I've spoken with other people about the folk school, and I often tell them, oh, I get really excited about all the great things we're doing. And they say, oh, that's really nice, but I'm not Finnish. And that's okay. I'm not Finnish either. I think it's important always to mention that we are committed to providing educational programming that is for everyone. Yes, for Finnish and Finnish Americans, but really for anyone who is interested in folk arts, traditional skills, community, regardless of their ethnic background. I come to it as somebody who is interested in education, of course, but also whose love is folk ways, traditional arts, music. And that's why working, actually running a folk school is kind of a dream job for me. So if you're interested in arts, music, community, this could be a place for you, even if you do not have Finnish heritage. And if you do, that's also great. So I always think that talking about what we do is most or best supported through pictures. So I'm going to show you some pictures now. So you can see these 4 up in the left-hand corner. I mentioned that's me teaching jouhikko. Jouhikko is a bowed lyre, a very old instrument that was actually found in many parts of Europe, but died out in all of the places, almost died out in Finland, but continued to exist in Estonia and in Finland and in Sweden, and is really going through this contemporary revival among folk musicians in Finland right now. And my colleague and friend Alice Marjoram and I are working on a little bit of a revival here in the US. More on that in a minute. We also, you can see to the right of that, in the upper right-hand corner, we sometimes teach things outside. You know, nature can be a part of what we do as well. This is from the Barks and Willows Symposium that we held last September with funding from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. And we had a Willow Tower class at the community garden. We partnered with the Pewabic Street Community Garden and the Ryan Street Community Garden where this photo was taken. Cooking in the bottom left-hand corner, that's Rika Hepakoski teaching pie making, Karelian Piraka. And then in the bottom right, weaving. This is Lisa Wiedela, who I'll talk about again in a minute because she's going to be teaching for us, but she's doing a type of pile rug weaving or wall hanging on an upright loom there in the bottom right-hand corner. And now prepare to see some familiar faces, I think, from your group. So we do weaving, as I've mentioned. So this is in the fiber studio in the bottom right-hand corner. Above that, ceramics. This was one of our ceramics courses with Kenyon. And then to the left, this was from a couple years ago now, when Laurel Primo came and taught and performed in early 2022. So we have courses that happen in this fiber studio where I am now, in other studios as well, as in the Heritage Center and outdoors. And I always look at this picture in the bottom right and think very fondly, we should do that again. This was a weaving round robin where we all set up different towel warps, and we're all holding the same warp. So that's different people's weaving on one single set of threads is a way to describe it, that's going to be cut up and turned into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 different towels. And just see how diverse that is. We all started with the same baseline and then wove such different things because, so to me, that's like a representative of this individual transformation or individual creativity plus community, sort of symbolically there in the cloth. So we also have had other, all kinds of other different kinds of workshops. So this big picture here is from a boot making class. This was before I worked at the folk school. They had some funding to bring instructors from Finland. And so they brought this instructor to teach traditional boot making in the Heritage Center. And you can see a couple more pictures there from our Barks and Willows that's out at the community garden with their towers. I spy somebody who's in this room. There's a couple of people in this Zoom room right now who are in some of these pictures. We've got himili making. That's a traditional ornament or mobile making practice, which is in the left, and then some bead making, willow bead making from last fall. So we do lots of different kinds of things. I think sometimes people assume that we're just fiber, and that is really a strong part of what we offer. But we also do wood and music and dance and leather and, you know, whatever we can do as people are interested in and as we have teachers, instructors available to teach. So we have some fun things coming up that I want to talk about. So in April, we will be partnering with the Finlandia Gallery, which is still going along with the bookstore, the Heritage Center, the archive, and the Finnish American Reporter newspaper. And in April, we're going to have we're going to host Heather Hietala, who is pictured here on the left in the blue. Now she's working in ceramics in this picture. She's not going to be doing ceramics for us this time. She's a Finnish American artist working in North Carolina. And I secured some grant funding to have her come up here, and she's going to be exhibiting at the Finlandia Art Gallery, which is still open. There's a great show up right now of Cynthia Cote's work. And then next it will be Heather in April. And she will also be teaching 2 workshops for the folk school while she is here. One of them is textile techniques in wire, which is in the an example is in the upper right-hand corner there, and also a contemporary embroidery and stitching class, which an example is in the bottom right-hand corner there. But I'm also previewing some other things. We've got some dance coming up this summer, some jouhikko, and some weaving. That's Lisa Wiedela at her loom at home. You can kind of see a little bit more of this technique that she's doing. It's called ryu in Finnish. I can't roll my R's. I'm sorry to the Finnish speakers in the room. It's a hard word to say, but you can see it's like a pile. It's fuzzy, right? It's like a pile rug. In her case, she's making these beautiful, beautiful pieces that can hang on walls. And maybe if you've been to some of the folk school at midsummer exhibits in the gallery in the past, you've seen some of her work, and she will be teaching a ryu weaving workshop in June. So let me just get to the next slide. There we go. So over here on the left, we've got Kay Seppala. She's going to be teaching a 6-week Kantele class. Phyllis Fredendall is going to be teaching soon. She's on the 16th, in just under a week. She's going to be teaching a fun with color class, which she'll delve into some color theory in a very accessible way. I will be teaching a couple of knitting classes. I've got a beginning knitting workshop coming up the end of this month, and a beginning knitting 2 workshop, which is kind of like, all right, I know the very basics and I'm sort of ready for the next steps, coming up at the end of April. I mentioned already that Heather Hietala will be teaching contemporary embroidery and textile techniques in wire. So all of those listed there are open for registration on our website, which I'll share with you in a moment. But I'm also starting to do some things that don't really need registration, and for which donations are always welcome, but otherwise it's come as you are. So I'm doing a knitting lunch hour on Tuesdays from noon to 1 here in the Fiber Studio. So if you like to knit, it's not an instructional, it's not a class, it's not a workshop. It's just a time to be together for about an hour once a week to knit together and share knitting and talk about yarn, you know, whatever, social. But also learning from each other, not in an instructor setting, but in a communal learning setting. And then coming soon, these things are not yet open for registration, but will be quite soon. We're planning a bit of a fun week at midsummer time, Johannes time. Lisa Wiedela, who you've seen a couple pictures of now, and I saw in the chat that Miriam mentioned that Lisa was your office assistant at the fellowship, and she will be teaching a week-long ryu weaving workshop, and it is for people who kind of already know a little bit of the basics, can already dress a loom. If you don't already know how to dress a loom, Phyllis will be teaching in May a loom warping or dressing workshop to get you going and ready for Lisa's workshop. Later in the summer, beginning weaving workshop. A lot of this work this year is, again, being supported by the American Scandinavian Foundation. Of course, all of our work generally is supported by Finlandia Foundation, who's our employer and who really saved us. But these additional, some of these workshops and being able to bring in instructors from away are funded by outside funding as well. We're hoping to start a singing circle, and that'll be a little bit like the knitting lunch hour, where it's going to be just sort of a drop-in free or at-will donation. Bow making and beginning jouhikko at midsummer. There'll be a dance. We're planning a dance with whitewater. And there will be the 3rd annual Folk School at Midsummer exhibition. We've been collaborating with the art gallery for the last couple of years to host a summer exhibition of work by folk school instructors and students in the gallery. I think some of you, I know Miriam's been there. Some of you in the room have been there in the past. And we're working on getting woodworking and ceramics and other things going again. We are still in a transition. I think a lot of people think, oh, it's been a year since the announcement. Surely everything has been smoothed out in a year. It hasn't. But to spare you the details, know that we are very diligently working behind the scenes to get things back up and running. But it's been, you know, the folk school was founded in 2017, had a few good years there. COVID hit, things stopped. We got going again after COVID. We got some outside grant funding. Phyllis and I were hired. And then the university closed. So we are doing our very best, dealing with all sorts of things. I've learned more about real estate in the last year than I ever hoped or thought that I would. Insurance, all that sort of really dull stuff that we have a lot of potential. I have a lot of ideas. If you're wondering why we aren't doing more, just wait, we're gonna do more. So if you're really, if you haven't already been to the folk school, you're kind of getting excited about what's possible here. Let's talk about some ways to get involved. A lot of people ask like, oh, how do I know when you're going to do that thing? Or how do I know when registration is going to open? I would love to be able to write personal emails to each and every one of the 530 people on the list, but unfortunately I often forget. So the best way to kind of stay posted on things generally is our email newsletter. And after this, as I'm taking questions, I can put some of these links in the chat as well, so that you can just click on them directly if that's your style. Otherwise, if you just Google, and I'll give you the link as well, but you can just Google Finnish American Folk School and you should find all of these things. We are on Instagram and Facebook. On Facebook, we share a page with the Heritage Center. So if you go follow the Finnish American Heritage Center, you'll see our updates on Facebook. Of course, you're very welcome to sign up for a workshop or a class or come to a concert or a dance. And you'll know about those things because either subscribing or following us. I also always welcome people to propose a program. The key to that being manageable is that, of course, it fits kind of with our mission and what we do, but also that there's somebody to teach it. So if you're thinking about a program, I love to hear about it, especially if you or someone you know is an expert ready to teach it. Now, when I say expert, I don't mean that one needs a teaching degree. And to me, that's kind of at the heart of some of what folk schooling is. You don't have to be a teaching master. Teaching experience is of course good, but it's really about sharing what you know and your skills with others and learning from each other in community. And then finally, I'm gonna be in the next few months really coordinating a group of volunteers. We've had people volunteer in the past. Actually, you can see here in this picture, these are members of, there's a lot of overlap here in some of our circles. I think there's at least one member of your fellowship in this picture. And then there's members of the Buellwood Weavers and Fiber Artists Guild, who we have a really close relationship with. They rent our studio space for their monthly meetings, and Phyllis and I are both members. There's also people in this image who have been instructors for the folk school, students of the folk school. And this was back in 2022, I think 2022, maybe 2021 fall. They very generously donated time and equipment to dig up the tiny little strip of land right outside of the windows here behind me to create the folk school dye garden and plant some lovely dye plants. And I'm hoping that by this fall, we'll have some natural dye classes here in the folk school and use some of the harvest from the dye garden. So there may be options for physical volunteer work like this, but also less physically demanding volunteer work is also always a possibility. So if you are interested, especially in proposing a program or volunteering, the best way to do that is to contact me directly. So this is my my email address, Clare Zuraw, clare.zuraw@finlandiafoundation.org. I will put that in the chat in just a minute, but note that my first name does not have an I in it, which is usually the trickiest thing. And then people get afraid of the Z in my last name. So we have just recently transitioned to a new website from the old university website. If you go to the old university website, it will still redirect you to our new website, but we have not landed on a shortened URL yet. So this is the shortest I've got, which is fahc.finlandiafoundation.org. And that is, that'll take you to the whole Heritage Center page. You can see what else is up with my colleagues and find the folk school menu, and it'll take you to our current list of classes. And if you were kind of intrigued by the concept of folk schooling across North America, or the history of folk schooling, or some of the resources I alluded to, check out folkschoolalliance.org. They have a really nice little history of folk schooling written up that gets into more detail than I was able to get into today, and has some works cited if you want to go read more about the history of folk schooling. And so with that, I am going to come out of this shared screen. I'm going to put some of those links in the chat, and I would love to take questions if anybody has any.